Welcome to today's forum, Empower the Vote, Understanding the Power of the Ruling Class. This forum is being sponsored by the Anti-Racism Action Committee of the Community Church of New York City. However, not everyone is a member and is not restricted to members. Anyone is welcome to join. My name is Rose Creighton, committee chair. The members of the group are Daniel Etchlin, Faye Bennett Lord, Patty Paris, Ellen Rader, Marianne Brancoli, Diana Stewart, and David Strawn. This committee has been working together since the beginning of the pandemic. It was started as a book study group. However, noting the rising incidents of police brutality and other racist incidents, and the rise of Trumpism and the obvious threats to democracy, democratic ideas and practices, we decided that we needed to be more direct in our action. And so we decided to morph into an action group as well as a reading group. Our work is aligned with the 8th principle adopted by the Community Church of New York, which is a covenant to dismantle racism and other forms of oppression. Our speaker today has often been referred to as Brother Almighty. His name is Bob Law. And that is because of all of the initiatives that he has taken on over the years. I first got to know Bob through the Night Talk, which was on WBAI. It was through that program that he pulled people together from across the country to start Saturday academies and other programs to uplift the communities. He is a longtime freedom fighter and media justice advocate. He is also a well-established, highly respected professional broadcaster who currently hosts From the Streets with Bob Law. The program is on Saturdays, 11 to 12 noon, and it gives voice to a wide range of Black and progressive political and cultural perspectives. He is the producer of the documentary film, Say It Loud, which is a feature-length film about the state of Black radio today, its relationship with the recording industry, and the importance of independent voices on the public airways for the Black community. So I now introduce you to Bob Law.
Thank you very much. I think that it is really not just commendable, but it is absolutely necessary that conscious people, enlightened people, organize, move from the study group is really essential. I remember when we used to have study groups, and the study groups, the book reading groups are really important. But it is really very encouraging, and it is also very important that those study groups, as people become more conscious, that those study groups morph, as you say, into a direct action group as well. So I just want to applaud you all for doing that. The idea here today about the power of the vote and understanding the ruling class. See, one of the things that has happened is that a great many people have decided not to vote. And it's not that they are just maybe apathetic, but they've decided not to vote because they have determined that the vote is a waste of time. They have determined that they really can't make a difference, that the electeds don't really pay attention anyway. Once they get in office, our challenge is to hold their feet to the fire, those kinds of things. And people have begun to understand that that's just not real, that once they get in office, we don't have the capacity to hold their feet to the fire. What does that translate into in real terms? And so people have been disappointed by the performance of elected officials. And so they have decided not to even participate in the process. And then, of course, there are people who really are just apathetic. But even their apathy is rooted in the firm belief that the vote is a waste of time. And in their lives, it does appear that the vote is a waste of time. They have not seen changes occur. They have not seen politicians keep their promises. They've not seen things affect their lives. Their lives just go on business as usual. And so they've decided not to vote. Here's what we need those folk. Here's what we need to understand, particularly when you talk about it within the context of understanding the power structure, the policymakers. See, they really don't want you to vote. They ignore you. They try to discourage you. I want you to understand that that is deliberate. They really do not want full participation in the process. So when you decide, you think that you have decided not to vote. In reality, the policymakers, the people that you don't trust, they are the ones who have decided that you should not vote. And so they are the ones who have decided to ignore you, to discourage you, so that you will ignore the process. So when you determine not to vote, it's not necessarily your idea. That it is not necessarily your idea that voting won't work. It is the people who need to control the process, the people who need to control the policy. You know, there's a book called Flipped by Greg Blumenstein that talks about how Georgia turned purple and broke the monopoly of Republican power. And one of the things that he talks about is the kind of work that was done to get Reverend Warnock elected. See, that state is so deeply entrenched with right-wing, racist, Republican power. But it was the mobilization of the people that turned that around. And see, the policymakers, be they Democrats or Republicans, the politicians, while they talk about how wonderful the result in Georgia was for democracy, but in a very real sense, they are all threatened by the turnaround in Georgia, because it demonstrated what could definitely happen if the people actually are mobilized. If the people actually change their mind about how they participate in the political process. And if you decide that you are going to assume your power, if you decide that you are not going to relinquish your power any longer, and you're going to begin to organize and mobilize, you can make significant changes. But it is the policymakers, it is the political machines that actually work to discourage voting. I remember talking to a prominent politician in New York City some years ago, and I believe it was the Democratic Party had released some dollars for voter registration, and the voter registration was not happening. And it is still not happening. And I said to this prominent politician in New York City, whatever happened to the voter registration? How did that not materialize? And he said that we don't really want to increase voter participation, that we're not really going to push voter registration, because right now, in my assembly district or in my congressional district or my senatorial district here in New York City, I've got only about 4,000 to 6,000 people that actually vote in the primaries, and which is where the decisions are actually made. At least in New York City, whoever wins the Democratic primary generally wins the election. Not every single time, but generally wins the election, particularly at the level of Congress and Assembly and State Senate, City Council. Whoever wins the Democratic primary wins the election. Everybody comes out in the general election and votes blindly. I was out in front of a polling place during the gubernatorial election. And I said to a young woman who was going down the ramp into the community center to vote, can I give you this literature about my candidate? I'm here on behalf of the Freedom Party. Can I give you this literature about my candidate? And she said, no, don't bother. When I get downstairs, I just call my mother and I say, Mommy, who should I vote for? And that's how I vote. And that is how a great many people vote, not taking the process seriously. And so the politician said, I only have about 4,000 to 6,000 people who I have to contend with in my district. Y'all want to do voter registration. You want to increase that number. You want to, instead of my having 4,000 to 6,000 people, you want me to have 10,000 to 15,000 people. That's more people I have to contend with. There's more work I have to do. I'm very happy with the small turnout. I'm very happy with the small number of people who participate in voting. That makes my job easier in terms of relating to my constituents. And so it is the political machinery that in a very real sense functions to discourage people from voting. So when you decide not to vote because it doesn't work and because the politicians don't really care what you say, that's precisely what they want you to conclude, so that you will be discouraged. But if you were to actually participate seriously and use the vote as a political tool. See, there are too many people who simply vote as their civic duty. And during the civil rights movement, during the voting rights movement, I was engaged in the voting rights movement. We didn't engage in all of that. We didn't get beat up. We didn't, some of us were murdered. We didn't do that. We didn't go through all of that just so you could vote your civic duty. What we wanted you to do was to use the vote to effect change. We wanted you to use the vote as a political tool. We wanted you to take voting seriously. And so it is a betrayal of the movement if you actually vote like it's your civic duty and you don't really have to pay attention who you're voting for, what they stand for, and you just come out and when you get down to the polling place, you call somebody and say, who should I vote for? See, that's a betrayal of the voting rights movement. The voting rights movement was to empower the community with the vote. When we went to Birmingham, Alabama, we went to Birmingham in order to, and the voting rights movement, it was not just so that you could vote. It was so that you could use your vote to get rid of Bull Connors. The people who came to vote came to use their vote as a political tool. And that was the reason for a voting rights movement, so that you could more effectively effect change by using the power that you already had as an organized community. And so it is important that people understand, I believe it is important that people understand on more than one level how important it is to vote. But only if you are going to take voting seriously. You know, we need to not only vote, but we need to produce candidates that come from among us, that come up out of the movement. You know, when we first started to vote, when Black people, with the voting rights movement was securing the vote, we first started to vote, we really didn't ask very many questions about the content of the character of the people we were voting for. We wanted to get Black people elected to office because we were conducting the voting rights movement very much so in the South, where Black people had been historically excluded, and Black people understood the consequences of that. So our feeling was that any Black person that gets elected is going to move in the interests of Black people. They didn't really have much of a choice. Now that's very different now. Now there are Black people who are getting elected to office, and it is a result of their own personal political ambition. You know, there are people who are getting elected to office and getting in office and announcing in office that I'm really planning to run for the next office. You know, they're already in office saying, I'm going to run for governor. So you didn't even serve this job yet. You know, in New York City, when the current mayor, Eric Adams, was elected borough president of Brooklyn, he announced, after being in Brooklyn as borough president for about 4 months, he announced that he really wants to be mayor, hadn't done borough president yet. They make it clear that there is a personal political ambition as the motivating force. And so we now do have the responsibility, as well as the necessity of examining, as Dr. King said, the content of their character. It can't be done any longer on a skin analysis. It has to be done now on what you stand for, what your ideology is, what kind of a human being you are. And so that is really very important. But more so, well, I don't know if I should say more so, but another important part of it is you have to begin to understand that the decision not to participate in the process is a decision that you have been led to carefully and systematically, so that you would arrive at the conclusion that you should not bother to participate in the process because it doesn't work. But the reason you arrived at that conclusion is because there are people who did not want you to understand the power and the possibility of an organized community. And so you, as Malcolm said, you've been had, you've been took, you've been bamboozled, and you think that it was your own carefully calculated decision that led you to conclude that you should not participate in the process, when in fact you were led to that decision by people who were trying to discourage your participation from the beginning. I don't know now. As they say in the church, y'all don't hear me. I could see y'all ain't moving or doing anything. So y'all don't hear me, but I'm going to try and make this clear that it is possible, just as Georgia was flipped, and you look at how the Republicans are working really very, very hard in order to turn it back. But again, the point that the message from Georgia is not simply who was elected, but the message was what is possible if the people are actually mobilized. What is possible if the people are actually organized? And what is possible if the people don't surrender the power that we already have? And what is possible if you can identify people like Reverend Warnock, am I saying his name right? And people like Stacey Abrams and the people who were, see, these are people that the voters could have confidence in. And so we have a need to consider that as well. We can't just tell people vote because they know better. They know that many of the elected officials are not trustworthy. It's not that there aren't trustworthy people in our communities, but the people who are talented, the people who have integrity, generally avoid electoral politics. And so they don't, we don't encourage the right people to run for office. What happens is that we wait to see who's going to run. And then we ask those people who are running, what are you going to do about education? What are you going to do about unemployment? What are you going to do about healthcare? And see, you have not necessarily given any real thought to those questions yourself. So when somebody says what they're going to do about education, you don't really know if what they are saying to you is actually in the best interest of public education. You don't really know if that's the best idea. So we tend to just ask the politician what they're going to do, and then we wait to see what they are going to say and determine if what they have said makes sense to us. But if you do the work yourself, so you shouldn't go to politicians saying, what are you going to do about education? What are you going to do about healthcare? What you should go to politicians or candidates for office. And instead of saying, what are you going to do? We should be saying, here's what we want you to do. Will you do this? We've done the work. We've done the research. We know what's in our interest. In New York City, during the mayoral campaign, we did a mayoral forum. And I think the forum that I did along with Reverend Diane Lacey and Dr. Sam Anderson, I think that ours was the only forum that did not ask the candidates, what are they going to do? It said instead, will you give 30%, 25 to 30% of the city's procurement budget to Black businesses and developers? Will you do that? As opposed to, what are you going to do to help Black businesses? There's no telling what they would say. But if you go to them more specifically, will you do this? Yes or no? Will you appoint a world-class educator as chancellor with a commitment to fundamentally change and upgrade the public schools? Will you institute new curriculum that is much more inclusive than the narrowly focused white supremacist curriculum that currently exists in the New York City public schools? Will you change curriculum? As opposed to asking, what will you do? Will you make a point to hire more Black male teachers? There's a concern among education activists that male teachers are being eliminated, and in particularly Black male teachers are being eliminated. Will you address that? Will you hire more? See, you do the research first so that you know what you're talking about when you go to listen to a candidate and when you have a conversation with or a meeting with politicians. Don't go asking them, what will you do? Go saying, here's what we want you to do. Will you do this? That is a more informed and therefore a more powerful constituency. But it is the power, as it turns out, the Panther Party was correct back in the 70s, power to the people. The people have a power. And the adversaries, the people who are anti-justice, anti-democracy, anti-everything, they understand that there's power with the people. And so it is their strategy to discourage the people from mobilizing, from organizing, from using the power that they have, and instead encourage the people to abandon the political process. And so when you look at the voter turnout here for instance, in New York City, if you look at the voter turnout, you will see that during the primaries, there's like 6,000 people that vote, 8,000 people that vote. Candidates can't even get 51% of the vote. That's why they had to come up with ranked choice voting in order to push a candidate artificially over the threshold of 51%. There were candidates who were winning elections. Many of them, almost all of them, were winning elections with 38% of the vote and 42% of the vote. And they would win the election because the voter turnout is so low. And then when you look at the general election, in a district where there is 8,000 people came out to vote in the primary, 100,000 people came out and voted in that same district in the general election. That's because there are that many registered voters, but the registered voters are not enthused or empowered or encouraged to even participate in the process, except when they consider it their civic duty. People like to say that I voted, and there are people who will urge people to vote, and they'll say things like, I don't want to tell you who to vote for, but I just want you to vote. I think we need to reconsider that as well. And if you are paying attention, and if you are conscious, and if you are astute and you understand what the issues are, maybe if you understand what the issues are, then maybe you ought to tell people who to vote for. Maybe people ought to benefit from your level of consciousness, your level of for instance, if you have a study group, and the study group is looking at electoral politics, and you're looking at the candidates, Well, not very many people in the community are engaged at that level. So the community would benefit even more so if the study group would say, here's who to vote for. Let the, you know, see there's too much taking it really for granted is one way to put it, but just vote. I don't care who you vote for, just vote. I'm saying that's inadequate. If we are going to make change, if we're going to make things happen, then it is important who you vote for. And it is also important for enlightened people to share their enlightened consciousness. And so again, when you look at Georgia and how people are celebrating what happened in Georgia, I mean, that celebration is appropriate, but I think you have to really understand what happened in Georgia. Georgia has demonstrated what can happen if the people will be mobilized, if the people will be organized, and the political machines around the country, both Democrat and Republican, even though the Democrats did well in Georgia, the Democrats and the Republicans are threatened by the fact that this is what can happen if the people mobilize. And so there's going to be more things done to discourage voter participation. There's insufficient voter registration. There's insufficient voter explanation as a result of, and as a result, there's insufficient voter participation. We need to have forums around the city and around the country talking about the issues, but also helping people understand how important they actually are, and how important it is to appreciate and realize where your power is. And so, you know, for people who don't, as I say, people were not wrong when they concluded that they're wasting their time voting. People were not wrong because they were wasting their time, because the political machines had no intention of responding to them. Therefore, we have a need to replace those political machines. We have a need not just to do voter registration, but you've got to find people who are willing, people with integrity, people like Stacey Abrams. You've got to find people with talent and integrity, and we have to encourage them to run for office. We've got to replace the people who are already there. They are career politicians. They are people who are committed to their own personal political ambition. They don't have a vision for leadership. They don't have a vision for their constituents. They don't, you know, look at what is happening in cities around the country where gentrification occurs. Where there's gentrification, white people begin to move into the community. And so the community's demographics begin to change. Well, the elected officials in those districts, Black and white, they seem befuddled by now having new people in the district. They don't know quite how to serve both groups. They don't know how to serve. They like to say things like Black and brown, but they don't know how to serve Black and brown people and white people all at the same time. They don't have vision. They don't have talent. They don't, and they never did. All they ever had was all they ever had was ambition. And so we need to replace them with people who really do have a vision for this city, who really do have a vision for the state, who have a vision for the nation. And I think that what separates people like Reverend Warnock and Stacey Abrams from the traditional politicians is that they have demonstrated before elected office that they had a vision for justice and democracy and principle and integrity. And that is really what is necessary now, visionary leadership. We need a leadership that is a leadership that is responsible for or qualified for at times such as this. But that is basically what I wanted to say, that the vote is a tool. The vote is a weapon. And the vote needs to be weaponized. is the point I'm trying to make. You don't just vote just to be voting. We come out of the poll booth wearing a little sticker. They were giving away stickers that say, I voted. Doesn't mean anything if you voted and don't even know who you voted for. Don't even know why. And look at New York City with ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting exists because the voters are so turned off by the process that people were getting elected. As I said earlier, people are getting elected with less than 50% of the vote. And even in this last mayoral election, the winner, Eric Adams, was elected in the general election with less than 51% of the vote. In fact, even during the primary, none of the candidates were able to get 51% of the vote. That's why ranked choice voting was used. And then ranked choice voting artificially pushes someone across the 51% threshold. And so then if your first choice didn't win, then who was your second choice? And we'll give your second choice votes to if that person is still in the race. And you know how ranked choice voting works. And a great many people did not know how ranked choice voting works. So they voted for 5 people. They didn't want the 5 people, but they thought they were supposed to put in 5 names. So there are people who got credit for your vote, even though you really did not want that person. And so you have the vote. Ranked choice voting is a response to voter apathy and a response to the lack of voter participation. But ranked choice voting, in a very real sense, is a response to the political machinery diminishing the vote and discouraging the vote, and did not want more people to vote. So let's take the few people that do vote and create ranked choice voting so that the few people that do vote can artificially push someone across the 51% threshold. We've got to get the people, so people were not wrong when they decided that they would not vote. However, we can change that. And we need to begin to organize, politicize the community, organize and politicize the voters. Point to Georgia. Point out that even with entrenched racist politics in Georgia, entrenched, almost fascist Republican power in Georgia, still, and all the things that they did to diminish the vote and make it difficult to vote, still, a mobilized people were able to make a significant change in that state. Don't know how lasting it's going to be, because as you see, the Republicans have begun to take every means that they can in order to make it very difficult, if not impossible, for people to vote again. See, that ought to send you a signal that when they look at the extent to which the Republicans are trying to make it difficult to vote, the political machines understand what the possibilities are if the people are able to maximize their power at the voting booth. And that is really what we have to do. We've got to make it clear to people that your decision not to vote was not your decision. It was not even your idea. You decided not to vote because someone led you carefully to that conclusion. They discouraged you, they ignored you, and as a result of their policy, you decided not to vote. As difficult as it was to get things done back in the 1950s, Black people voted for Adam Powell over and over again. They had confidence in Powell. They had faith in Powell. And that same kind of thing is still possible if there's a candidate that people can believe in, and a candidate that actually has a vision for how to move their constituents forward. And so that is essentially what I wanted to say. The vote has to be made more purposeful. Understand this in conclusion, understand this. The voting rights movement was not a movement that was designed to give you the right to vote as your civic duty. The voting rights movement was a movement that we struggled through, that we suffered through in order to weaponize the vote, in order to give you a tool, the vote, in order to arrange for significant change in our lives and in our society. We didn't get beat up. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't get beat up just so that you could vote your civic duty in Mississippi. She went through all of that so that you would be able to use your vote as a political tool. And if you don't do that, even when you vote blindly, when you vote without understanding who you're voting for and what they represent, it is a betrayal of the voting rights movement. Even when you vote without thinking, even though you're voting, it's a betrayal of the voting rights movement. The movement was not for your civic duty. The movement was to empower you, to use the vote as a political tool. We need to weaponize the vote and use that vote in order to create the kind of society that is really possible. As we used to say, the people united can never be defeated. Forward ever, backward never. You all remember all those slogans? You know, it is, but those translate into real, into real world politics. And so the vote is essential, and your decision not to vote is not so ill-conceived. However, it was not your decision. You've been had. Now it's time to take back your power and think in terms of weaponizing the vote. When we talk about the power of the ruling class, when you talk about the power of the policymakers, see a great deal of their power comes from their not being challenged. A great deal of their power comes from our conceding the power that we do have and allowing them to make decisions and to set policy without any significant pushback from us or without us advocating what we firmly believe is in the best interest of all people. A lot of their power, not all, because they have power now, but a lot of their power is rooted in the fact that we concede so much of our power to them and give them an open field. And as I said earlier, final statement, the Panthers were right. Power to the people. John Lennon was right. You know, all we are saying is give peace a chance, give democracy a chance, give the people a chance. I played a song by John Lennon about power to the people on my show on BAI from time to time. It's the correct sentiment. The power is in the hands of the people. The policymakers don't want the people to remember or realize that. And so the policymakers have always moved to discourage the people. And it has been working. So understand again, when you don't vote, when you don't participate in the process, that was not your idea. You were led to that idea. You were handheld, somebody held your hand and walked you to that decision. Wasn't your decision at all. It is a decision that you arrived at because of how easily you had been manipulated. Now it is time to take your power back. Thank you all for listening to this.
Kimberly Westcott, you raised your hand, so you feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much. First, I just want to thank you, Mr. Law. That was so illuminating, and I so appreciate your scope and your vision. So I really just want to thank you. And then I wanted to ask a question, because when I was listening to the way you described the process of empowering the people and getting them engaged, I started to feel, in many respects, we have more of a production network problem than just and let me try to explain it. It's like when you've got bad food and you know that the people are getting it from a corporate food supply and they're forced to eat it and they know they don't want to eat it. And it's very much the same thing with a corporate controlled party system where you're not getting leadership that is aligned with vision. You're getting people that are coming through, and you get Black faces in high places. You get people that are not, they haven't made a commitment to values. Who knows how they get there? Most of us don't really even know how the leadership gets promoted into this arena where they can get money. And so to me, it seems really, it's going to be awfully hard if we don't have product in the pipeline that is actually connected to the value set of the people.
Mhm.
So how do we do that? That's my question.
So I think that is really the core of the problem. It is difficult to motivate the people if the people can identify with and invest in the leadership. And so it is very important to also produce leadership. See, it can't just be a voter registration campaign, for instance, urging people to vote. The people have got to see a leadership that they can invest in, believe in. It's like when the first time that Obama ran, there were people, the voters really invested in Obama. They invested in what he seemed to represent. And there was a great enthusiasm for him, even among white voters. Now, there was great enthusiasm for him among Black voters because he was a Black guy who was polished and smooth and well-dressed and articulate. And he represented, he was a good public relations image for the Black youth, for Black people. But people were able to identify with him. There are other people, even before Obama, in 1984, people identified with Jesse Jackson. And Jesse could articulate the issues and the concerns that people had. A lot of what Jesse promoted in 84 and in 88 are being promoted now and considered progressive politics. But it is going to take a new cadre of leaders, new leadership. So when we talk about voter participation, we have to also talk about offering the constituents a credible candidacy, credible leadership. Think in terms of, see, there are people now who see themselves as organizers. And if you ask them what they do in the movement, they say, I'm an organizer. I think we have to move even beyond just seeing yourself as an organizer and begin to see yourself as a leader. And the leader will still need to be an organizer, but we need leadership with vision, and that's just as important as all the other work that is being done. We have to encourage and support the people who are in our families, in our communities, I mean our political families, people who are in our communities, in our society, who are visionary. We've got to encourage them. I believe that there are other women like Stacey Abrams. I don't think Stacey Abrams is the only principled, courageous woman with integrity in the country. I think that there are other women like that. There are other men like Warnock. There are other people as well. We've got to identify them and we've got to nurture them, and we've got to produce a new cadre of leaders at the same time that we try to mobilize the people. And that cadre of leaders are very necessary in order to mobilize the people.
Marianne Roncoli, one of the members of the Anti-Racism Action Group, has asked, how do voting rights activists deal with the backlash?
When, coming out of up and all through the voting rights movement, the backlash was not our concern. The backlash did not have any effect at all. When you went into the voting rights movement, see, we understood that the resistance was there. That's why we went. See, the difference between the civil rights movement, which was very much anchored in voting rights, and the current protest movement. See, there's a difference between the protest movement and the civil rights movement. It looks the same. It's marches and demonstrations. the protest movement even uses some of the same language as the civil rights movement. Protest movement says, when do we want it? Now. That's what we said in the voting rights movement. Protest movement says the same kind of things, you know, same slogans, forward ever, backward never, all those kind of things. However, the difference between the protest movement and the civil rights movement is that the civil rights movement did not wait for something to happen in order to protest it. The civil rights movement targeted injustice in Mississippi, in Birmingham, in Georgia. The civil rights, like SNCC and the Freedom Summer Project in Mississippi, we didn't wait for something to happen to go to Mississippi and protest. We had already seen enough. We already knew what the realities were in this society. So the civil rights movement targeted goals and targeted injustice and went there. The protest movement does, and so the civil rights movement was clear. We're going with the voting rights, as I said earlier. The reason that we want you to register to vote is because you've got to vote Bull Connors out of office. You know, the reason that we want you to register to vote is because there are other people all up and down the state, all throughout the South, that you have to vote them out of office and put progressive people in office. The protest movement doesn't do that. The protest movement responds after the fact, after something, an atrocity has been committed, and then we come out in the street and we protest it. Sounds like the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement was more targeted and therefore much more effective. The civil rights movement was about effecting change. So when the backlash came, we expected the backlash. That's why we went to Mississippi, because of the conditions that existed there. That's why we went to Albany, Georgia. That's why we went to Birmingham, Alabama. You know, that's why we went to Cambridge, Maryland with Gloria Richardson. We already knew what was there. The backlash, it was waiting for us. And we never really saw it as a backlash as a result of the work we were doing. We understood that it was a reaction and a resistance to the work that we were doing. And that's the reason that we were doing the work. The backlash was not something that discouraged. It was something that we expected. And I think that that is necessary even now to understand that, you know, we're up against some evil people. These people are wicked. These are some evil folks. And so we expect that they are going to do all that they can. But, you know, there's a song. This young sister Layla sings in South Africa, something inside so strong. She says, the higher you build your barriers, the taller I will grow. That's how we dealt with the backlash. The further you push my rights away, the faster I will run. That's how we dealt with the backlash. We will not be defeated. We can't lose. And there was an elderly woman back in 1984 who was asked about Jesse Jackson's candidacy. And you know, in 84, everybody was saying, what does Jesse want? He can't possibly expect to be president. He can't possibly expect to win. And they put that on Jesse. So like, why are you even out here? As opposed to acknowledging that the only reason Jesse could not expect to win was because of the attitude of white Americans. And they were asking everybody, people, why are you supporting Jesse? He can't win. And there was an elderly woman who said, what do you mean he can't win? He be winning all the time. That's how we dealt with the backlash. We be winning all the time.
Thank you very much. The next question is a longer one by Diana Scott. Nonprofit organizations aren't permitted to endorse candidates. How do they begin to prioritize and publicize issues for voters to use when deciding which candidates to vote for? Also, in places like San Francisco, with a Black woman Democrat as a mayor, there's a push to gerrymander districts to dilute progressive choices. This is really important and difficult to prevent even when exposed publicly.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the question? Those are two statements.
So one is, how do we begin to prioritize and publicize issues for voters when we aren't allowed to endorse candidates?
Right, well, that's easy. just do that, publicize the issues, do the, as the sister who ran for mayor in Buffalo, and what her organization was doing all of that time in building support for her campaign was publicizing the issues, having public forums. You didn't have to deal with endorsing a candidate, but just doing the public forums and dealing with the issues, and make sure that the people are much better informed about the issues. That is helpful. You can do that without endorsing a candidate. But the other thing is that you may have to stop relying totally on not-for-profit status. You know, stop looking for grants and funding in order to do this work. You might have to abandon somebody. People can continue to do the not-for-profit status work, but somebody is going to have to raise their own money, even be for-profit, have the freedom to endorse candidates. You need political organizations that will not apply for not-for-profit status. Have a political organization and let the political organization endorse candidates. Don't the major parties endorse candidates? And they raise money. And so it doesn't have to be always a not-for-profit initiative, but organized groups that understanding that the reason that you're organizing is because you want to be able to endorse candidates. The reason that you're organizing is you really want to be able to run candidates for office. As we come back to the earlier question about visionary leadership, we have to come out of the box. There's too much going on that contains and confines what we're able to do. And I don't remember, but that's the first part of that. You can raise issues without endorsing candidates and be aggressive in doing community consciousness raising events around the community. Really pursue that as a real strategy.
So Diana, feel free to enter in a question if you have one about gerrymandering.
I guess my question about gerrymandering, because there's a major fight right now going on around this in San Francisco, how districts are being diluted by redrawing lines. Do you have any experience with that and pushing back? I mean, people are pushing back, but this is a real threat to the whole process.
Mm-hmm. You know, who is it that is redrawing the lines? It is elected officials. It's the politicians who have agreed to participate in that process. You can't leave those unprincipled people in office and then protest their unprincipled behavior. At the bottom of all of this is the need to get rid of them, to replace them. You know, first things first, we've got to put people in office that are going to protect our interest. We haven't done that. So there's a whole group of politicians, happens here in New York City, happens in New York State. There's a whole group of politicians, Black politicians as well, a whole lot of Black politicians who participate in the gerrymandering process each time it occurs. They are unprincipled. And we can't, there's not a strategy that I'm aware of that blocks the behavior of unprincipled policymakers once you put them in policymaking positions. We have to start from square one. You've got to replace them. You've got to put people in office that we can have confidence in, that we can have trust in. That is where it begins. Much of what we struggle against is because we have allowed people who don't deserve to be there to be in policymaking positions. Reverend Barber just had a meeting about a week and a half or so ago at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. And he asked people to meet with him, and about 70 people were there representing clergy and community organizations. And one of the things he said at the meeting, he said, you would be surprised. And I think he said it like that because he was surprised. He said, you would be surprised how many Black electeds are not our friends. And I'm not surprised. We've been saying that for some time. However, that is where the problem has to be addressed. When you look at policy that is being implemented, written into legislation, who's doing that? Who's redrawing the lines? Who is guilty of gerrymandering? It is the elected officials who are in a position to do that. We've got to change them. I'm not aware of a thing that you can do other than to push back and to protest it and file lawsuits, and maybe that would be helpful, filing lawsuits against the gerrymandering. But the people who do it need to pay a political consequence for doing that. The people who help redraw those lines need to be voted out of office. And it is pointed out that the reason we're coming against you is because you participated in that unprincipled process.
But do you think it's because, I hope I'm not interrupting, that people identify with the wretched, they don't want to identify with the wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon would say, but they sympathize with the ruling, with the corporations, the corporate elites, the wealthy, trying to help out their interests? Do you think that's what's motivating it?
You mean the people who are doing that, who are drawing the lines?
Are they consciously understanding that they are siding against the will of the marginalized and the disadvantaged, and they're moving more towards helping those who already have and giving them more?
Yes, I believe they're doing it deliberately. I believe they understand that how it hurts their constituents, how it hurts their base, but they are looking beyond their constituents. They're looking to their own personal future. They get rewarded. People get rewarded for engaging in these kinds of unprincipled behavior. In some years ago, both Eric Adams and I attempted to run for Congress and to get on the ballot. And the political machines blocked that. They have all kinds of tricks in New York City to disqualify your nominating, your ballot petitions, the color ink. Somebody filled out put their name on the petition in blue ink, and the person carrying the petition signed it at the bottom in black ink, they will actually say that that's fraudulent and deny your petitions. And when I did that we were going to run, there was a reporter from the Daily News who said to me that you are going to find it impossible to get on the ballot, that this machine will do everything they can to prevent you from getting on the ballot. They don't think they are convinced that you can beat the congressman, you can beat Ed Towns, Eric Adams can beat Major Owens. However, they're going to do everything they can to keep you off the ballot, which is what they did. But the people who did it, then the reporter went on to say that the judge who is presiding over the balloting process when you go to court, that judge was the congressman's attorney 2 years ago. The reward for doing the dirty work is they get a judgeship. The attorney who was struggling with us at that time said that he did not enjoy it. He knew that all these people carrying the petitions and the people working in the community were legitimate community people, that he didn't enjoy doing this kind of thing, that they knew that the petitions had been sabotaged, but that he's through with this because he's going to get a judgeship, and he did. There's a reward on a personal level for the politicians who participate in this process. It doesn't hurt them personally, but usually it is people who are intending to resign, retire very shortly anyway. But there's rewards, personal rewards for participating in this kind of unprincipled actually, I guess, participating in unprincipled behavior. So yes, I think that they do understand the harm that they are doing, but they do it because they were unprincipled to begin with.
Thank you. David, I see that you are raising your hand. Please go ahead and unmute.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. And what's coming to mind from what you have said is, I think, the fact that we're living in a one-party state with two divisions, Republican and Democrat. And I feel that those two divisions are controlled by a ruling class from top to bottom. What I'm saying to you is, what would you suggest in terms of having some viable parties other than Republican and Democrat? Because we don't have that at all. The choice is two ruling classes parties that represent the ruling class of this country, and that are imperialists and do damage all over the world. So we need something else other than Democrat and Republican Party, which are really the same with two divisions. Also, since the 20s and 30s, when we had very few elected officials in the Black community, now we have numerous, maybe thousands of elected officials. However, the condition of African Americans, I don't think has improved that much. So we have no people in the 20s, or very few in the 20s and 30s. And now we have a lot, and the condition of Black folks is probably worse than it was then. What do you think about that?
Amen. That's what I have to say to that. There's that wasn't a question. Those were two correct statements, and I would say yes, sir. Amen. We need another party, major party, and that's something that needs to be examined and begin to organize a real party. You know, there were some opportunities to do it in the past. We didn't fulfill that. Didn't take advantage of those opportunities as the people were fired up and politicized. We should have done it in '84 with Jesse could have formed a political party. His support was so so solid and broad, but we didn't do it. But we'd still, it is not too late. It'll never be too late because the condition is the same. As you point out, we have more Black elected officials than ever. And the condition of Black people is worse than ever. So clearly, these Black professional politicians are not the answer. Black faces in high places are not the answer. There needs to be, you're absolutely right, there's two parties all representing the ruling class. No matter who wins in these elections, no matter who wins, Democrat or Republican, the Black community loses. Doesn't make any difference who wins, we lose. So yes, you are correct. I believe that you are correct, and that we really need to focus on creating an alternative to the two major parties being the only choice. We really need a major party, a third party that is, and I know there are smaller independent parties around. There was the Working Families Party. There was other parties. Didn't Ralph Nader try to launch a party? There are other parties, but they need to be much broader philosophically and appealing, much more appealing to the masses of people, and create a real major third party, another party. We tried to introduce the idea of another party a couple of years ago with the Freedom Party. And it's difficult, as the sister pointed out. There are people who are committed to the major parties. They have faith in them. They have confidence in them. And those parties are presented, particularly through the media, as the only real parties, as the only real political organizations. And so there are people who tend to think that the Democrats and the Republicans are the only thing worth our attention. So there's a lot of work to do to change the mindset of the people. But I think that you are correct. What is necessary is another party altogether.
Thank you.
I can. Again, thank you, Dr. Law. Tomorrow will be my 54th birthday, and I was born in Memphis just 20 days after Dr. King was killed, and grew up. Marion Barry was my uncle, and grew up in a family that, even within our own family, the realities of the class divide within our own family, a lot of what you've shared, and I'm just thinking about the generations that were lost due to the school to prison pipeline, if prisoners can vote, all of these discussions, and my relationship with the likes of, and I say her name in respecting that her son was murdered. Samaria Rice is Tamir Rice's mom, and the way that the communities of color treat certain people, even around the defund the police, and how many Black folks, right, have circled around that narrative when the issues of our communities have been decimated by the school to prison pipeline. I voted Democrat because my family did. And this is the first time in years I haven't given a quarter to the Democratic Party because of some of the issues that you highlight. I will always vote and bring my ancestors with me to vote, and coming from the working class, working poor of the African American community. So all of the things that you raise, right, and I would like to just raise a little resistance against the discourse of claiming the civil rights movement and then looking at the progressive movement that is happening now. I believe, and will go to my grave thinking, this is a part of the revolution that we need. And hearing Sir David now for almost 2 years talk about the need for a third party, or a different party, and then really thinking about what Reverend Barber is working towards, the Poor People's Campaign, and solidifying that to be that. What if that is the next party that we galvanize and build enough around a moral question? So I just wanted to, first of all, honor the teach-in that I've had today, coming from your lived years experiences, but also like watching how the communities, when a woman loses her son to murder by the police, and everybody, because she's of the class and loud as she is, rightfully so, that we have all of these things, right? My family is a part of the school to prison pipeline in ways that, I'm accountable to. So I'm not sure if there's a question in that, but for me to not to have a little bit of pushback about the divide, about the civil rights movement, and the situation that we find ourselves in with Black folks being at the heel of all of these things. We need y'all's leadership, and for Black Lives Matter, for all of its ills and its positive. I want to, as religious communities, we cannot advocate for policies or politicians, but we can, as you strongly report, we have to blast the issues that are the moral issues of our day in ways that I know that we, in the Unitarian Universalist context that I've been in, have not been skilled enough to follow the lead of Black folks in their communities that are most impacted by the administration here in New York City, or there in New York City. So just a broad statement about our need for your ongoing teaching with us, and to see that we are the revolution, right? Ain't nobody else but us, right? Nobody else but us. So thank you again. And any of my circuitous thoughts, any reactions or responses would be much appreciated.
All right now. Well, I appreciate your question, your thought. Gives me an opportunity for clarity. See, coming out of the movement, we are unapologetic about the movement, the civil rights movement. I mean, we didn't stay with the civil rights movement. Many of us came out of the civil rights movement into the Black consciousness movement, into the Black power movement. I was a member of the original Harlem Black Panther Party. We moved very much so from the civil rights strategy and agenda to an agenda of self-determination. But I don't denigrate the civil rights movement. I'm unapologetic for the role that we played and the role that the civil rights movement played. It was the civil rights movement accomplished everything it set out to do. It did not set out to destroy white supremacy.
Amen.
But it set out instead to create integrated societies and integrated, its goal was integration. and on its goal was to get Black people the right to vote and then to get Black people elected to office. It did all of that. There were some other things that you can look back in retrospect and say, well, maybe we should have focused on these other things in terms of self-determination and ownership, like almost every other ethnic group in this country has done. However, the point that I'm trying to make about the difference between a protest movement and the civil rights movement target the issue and even the city is, and when we talk about the violence, for instance, right now, and we protest the violence in May, early in May, I am hosting a national Respect Yourself Youth Initiative Summit. And the summit is bringing people together. People have already agreed to come together. And this is our concern. We don't need anything else to happen. Anybody else to be shot, anybody else to be murdered by the police. We don't need anything else to happen. The society, the state and the city, the mayor and the governor, here in New York City, the mayor and the police commissioner, Black though they may be, have targeted Black youth. They are going to try and crush Black youth rather than crush the conditions that are creating the behavior, the mindset, the attitude of Black youth.
Yes.
And so rather than crush the conditions, these wicked people are going to crack down on Black youth. They're going to come with stop and frisk and stiffer penalties and higher bail. And because the violence that these young people are engaged in is real. So there's support for crushing them as a way of reducing crime. And so since they have targeted Black youth, we have a need as the people who still love Black youth.
Yes.
We have a need to target them also.
Yes.
We don't need anything else to happen. We don't need to wait to protest anything. We need
Hallelujah.
to target Black youth to take them out of the line of fire and give them a life. And
Hallelujah.
so we've begun to do, and so we have a whole plan that worked effectively with a small number of young people back in the 1970s, this Respect Yourself initiative, but a Respect Yourself youth initiative, a national youth initiative that targets Black youth to take them out of the line of fire, to give them extraordinary opportunity, which we are capable of doing as part of the campaign. We've got a number of things that can't go through all of it here. We have a number of things that we want to do and launch this campaign nationally, but that's what I mean. Rather than continue to protest the injustice, we've got to target Black youth ourselves and not wait for anything else to happen that we will protest. We've already seen enough. We already know what's at stake. Now we have to have strategies. We've got to mobilize the community, and this Respect Yourself initiative mobilizes the community at large. It mobilizes Black men in particular. It addresses music and the role that music is playing in teaching anti-woman, anti-life values. If you listen to the lyrics, do you know that there are this, and these young people are listening to this music 24/7, as they say. And the music is talking about pulling up alongside people in a car and shoot them in the head to see how they're gonna act. The lyrics call for murder. They call for degradation. They call for rape. They call for gang rape. And so there's one component of it deals with the music and the role that music will have to play to help reintroduce another kind of value system as it did back in the day. And so that is the point, though, that the protest is absolutely necessary because you have to make it clear that a certain kind of behavior is unacceptable. But I'm saying that the protest is alone is insufficient. We've got to do more. And this initiative, this youth, this global youth initiative or national youth initiative is the kind of thing that is in the spirit of the civil rights movement that set its own target. And that's just, and so that's the point that I'm trying to make.
If I can, because I have a little bit of insights on one of these questions, there already is UU the vote. Does Bob see this as a viable action? And I'm not sure if you're aware of our campaign within Unitarian Universalism that is organizing in this way with community organizations that are focusing on community leaders that are experiencing this and growing a leadership capacity within local communities to create the strategies, to create the pipeline that I think you and Ms. Westcott were speaking of. That's happening within our denomination. And we just had a kickoff campaign for that last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago about our UU the Vote efforts that are focusing on marginalized communities, LGBT communities, and poor folks and prison industrial complex to organize around our voting efforts. That's not just the coming election, but thinking strategically about how to do that. So you may not be aware. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening within Unitarian Universalism specifically around the vote, but that is the question that Ms. Roncoli was asking.
I'm not aware of that specifically, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And there are other initiatives already exist, and we've got to bring them together into this national campaign, working with each other, being made aware of each other, and all working with each other to push back against these grave, misguided injustices. See, there's a lot of really good work that is being done by various organizations that are focused on the prison population. So they've got a lot of things in place to help people who are coming out of prison. And what I've said to some of them already is, you've got to expand that to include people who have not yet gone to prison. See, the reentry programs are necessary, but if you consider that there are people who are not in prison who are also not full participants in this society, they need to enter society as well. They need help and guidance, not just for people who come out of prison, but people who are not in prison who still don't know how, don't have the help and support that they need to navigate in this racist society. And so the programs that have been created that are really very, very good have to be expanded and include not only formerly incarcerated people, but people who are not yet incarcerated, because that's who they are. To a large extent, as people who are not yet incarcerated. There is a prison, a public school, there's a cradle to the and through public school, there is a prison pipeline. From the public school to prison pipeline is very real. And so there are young people who are not yet in prison. And the way we keep them out of prison is going to be to use some of the same strategies and programs that are being used for people who are coming out of prison to help them become much more productive and navigate through this convoluted society. We need to do that with the people who are not in prison as well. And so that is the reason. All of that has to all come together, and we begin to work with each other. And I am aware that there are initiatives already in place. I work with a group called the Peacekeepers. You know, we're in the street as violence interrupters. There are people, Erica Ford out in Queens with Love My Life organization, violence interrupters. All of that exists, but it's got to come together now. And the whole community has to be made aware that there are people who still love Black youth, who have targeted Black youth, and we're inviting everybody to become a part of that campaign, because the people who despise us have targeted Black youth and are pretending that Black youth are just irrational, just crazy. that the way that they behave is because they are just hoodlums and irrational, and they are committing these crimes because they know they can get away with it. See, that's just stupid. If you look at the prison population, it is black and brown primarily. Who's getting away with it? You know, they're all in prison. And this campaign of cracking down on Black youth is really, what's at the heart of it is the movement for mass incarceration. And mass incarceration feeds financially into the privately owned prison industry. And it is all connected. And so the people who are not equipped to lead at a time like this are unfortunately in leadership positions. They're going to try to crush our young people. We have a need to respond before that happens and take those young people out of the line of fire. And we're capable of doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Law. We've gotten to the end of our program. I would like to invite Faye to join the spotlight with you for a special presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Law, and to all of our gathered friends who stayed until the very end. Our wonderful chair, Rose Creighton, our members, Ellen Rader, and of course, I think we still have David Strawn and others who have remained. So in recognition of your personal commitment, dedication, cultural knowledge, political activism, and humanitarian services to anti-racism causes, for your expertise, Mr. Bob Law, on social justice, human rights, environmental and labor issues, and for your WBAI program, From the Streets, covering an exemplary range of Black and progressive perspectives, for your coordination of the New York State In the Millions More movement, for your current efforts to promote truth over lies, voting rights, prison reform, educational and empowerment efforts, and for your enlightening presentation as our guest speaker at this historic program entitled Empowering the Vote, Understanding the Power of the Ruling Class. We gratefully acknowledge your commitment to creating a just world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining this presentation. Rose, do you have any closing words for us?
I just really like to thank Bob Law. He really opened my mind to a different way of seeing things. And I think that's true for everybody. It was a really brilliant presentation. And we thank you so much. I will be in touch with you because I'm interested in the Respect Yourself project, as you probably know, because we've done this before, this kind of thing. So we just thank you very much. And we hope that we can get this information out to more people, because what you said was really eye-opening and it makes us think about voting in a very different way. And I don't know what to say to my friends who say I don't vote, because I'll have a better answer for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.